We got a 416, a brand new 416 inch Lt1 in with some problems that probably you need to be aware of, stuff you need to look out for. Hang loose and we're gonna get into it. All right, so on aftermarket stuff, especially cranks is the big deal, but you know, there's a lot of aftermarket pieces that have problems interchanging with other pieces. So on a performance crankshaft, all of the in the rod journals, the main journals, the snout, everything has a larger radius in the corner. And that large, we call it a fillet. That large fillet makes the crank much stronger and less susceptible to cracking in those areas, because most of the time a crack develops in a sharp corner. And if you look at a stock LS crank, and some Chryslers are like that too, even older Chryslers, the fillet is actually negative. It's called roll forging. So it's actually down, it's undercut in the corner, so you don't have an issue with radiuses. But what happened on this motor, I mean, there's other problems, but it's got like 10 or 15 run hours on it. And for whatever reason, they started taking the front off to do something and found some problems. But here in the come in here, here in the snout, there's a radius right here. And so the installer, so apparently this was a short block, and the installer took all of the stuff off the factory engine and put it on this engine with an aftermarket cam and some aftermarket heads. And so this is a GM timing gear. And if you look, come in here. If you look, there's no chamfer here. This is an aftermarket gear. Same piece, but you see that nice big radius? I mean, a chamfer, not a radius. This, it will fix the problem. And all of your aftermarket timing sets, I mean, who in the world puts a stock timing set on a performance engine? But that's another story. So what happened is this thing went up against that radius and had no relief. And so when the balancer was torqued, it swelled it up. And if you can see, it split it all the way down. So when it split it, obviously it opened up and got bigger, and that created some other problems. And you can see where, like especially, the oil pump was locked down because it spread out and it locked the inner gear in the pump. And so, and this thing had a new K1 oil pump. Come over here. So here's the pump, and this is the inner drive. And you can see that this was locked down on the gear, so it's pushing this against the cover. And so it's done chewed a groove in the cover. Not any fault of the pumps, but because of the installation. So we have destroyed I don't know what that thing costs, $500, $600. We have destroyed a $600 pump. We have, and then so back over here to the engine, you can see, so what happened is, if you see all of this, all these scratches and dig marks, it's on both sides, the pump was locked onto the drive gear and they couldn't get it off. So they went in here with pry bars trying to pry the pump off. And I mean, eventually they got it off, but they murdered the whole front of the block. So we're gonna have to stand it up in the mill and resurface this area and this area where the pump bolts. And then they used, this turd And of course, it's got a spring that goes behind it, and the spring come off and fell down and got into some junk. And you know, again, it should have had a damper, not a spring-loaded tensioner, and it should have had a quality timing set, and the timing set would have been tight instead of flopping around like the OE units. So as we were looking at all this stuff, I noticed the crank. Let me spin it over. I noticed the crank seemed like it had a lot of in play. So I put the indicator on it, and I done pulled the center cap off just looking at the thrust. But so that's 0, and that's like 13. So this thing's got 13 thousandths worth of thrust. It ought to be, you know, 5 or 6 or something. So I popped the cap off, and of course it's full of trash. And keep in mind, this is you know, I think they give $10,000 or $12,000 for the short block, and it's, you know, super duper hot rod with a forged crank and all that. And we got, and I mean, I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but it's got aluminum bearings in it, and it should have a hard tri-metal bearing. But if you look, you can see the crank's been hitting right in here in this lower edge. But if you look at the surface, all the scratches are going this way. Somebody, I mean, well, whoever assembled it, belt sanded the thrust on both sides. And so the thrust, you know, it ain't flat anymore. So it's just touching right there, and it's just touching right there. And then you can see it's touching a little bit right on the inside diameter. But all out here where the magic happens, it ain't touching anything. And so they sanded it to get that much thrust clearance, I assume. And why you would do that, I have no idea, because it don't need nowhere near that much thrust. And then, you know, I mean, it's, and the other odd thing, you know, for a motor that expensive, it's got, and I guess they bought a brand new GM block, I assume. So the caps have never been cut, just like they come from GM. It's got studs in it, and you know, so they didn't line hone it. They didn't cut the caps and line hone it. And you know, that's, I don't know, you know, I wouldn't do it that way if it was me, but you know, to each their own. So I'm gonna push a piston out of it, and we're just gonna see what the cylinder wall looks like. Because when we ain't there yet, but when we go over there and look at the cylinder head, the chambers are just caked with carbon, and they say it was smoking some. So I can only assume that we've got some cylinder wall problems, or, you know, I don't know, but I'm curious to look at a piston, because we were supposed to fix this thing, but I'm starting to think I might bow out of this project. Yeah, leave your bolts still engaged in the threads, and just a little bit on both sides, and that'll unseat it from the rod. Then you can pull it up and just take the cap off, and that makes it a little better. Yep, and we got aluminum, look at all that trash. And we got aluminum bearings in the rods also, and look at all that garbage. I got a stick to push these things out with, and I ain't got it in my hand. Yep. And we got cheap pistons. So, yeah, that's I mean, that's 10 or 15 hours of runtime. And we already done tore up the skirt already. So, yeah, and the top bearing, you can look at it, it's already pinching in the center. Right dead in the center is already getting the bearing. And then it's just covered in trash. But the crank looks all right. And here's another jewel. So we welded on the crank there, we welded on it there, we welded on it here, we welded on it here. The back, we welded on it all over here. More welding over here. We're drilling on the inner counterweights. You shouldn't ever try to correct on the counterweights. You should be, the first and last counterweight is where all corrections should happen. You should never be doctoring on the inners unless it's just like a little bitty peck or something, just trying to get to 0 or something. But I think that's cornbread. Yep, the holes ain't even deburred. And again, I mean, this is $10,000 or $12,000 right here. So this is what you get on the internet, and you know, it's yeah, I ain't gonna say no more. Let's flip it around and see what the cylinder bore looks like. We need some light on the subject. Oh yeah, come over here and look. So it's already on the thrust side. It's scratched all up bad on the thrust side already. So, and I would suspect if we do a little measuring, we're gonna find that there probably ain't enough clearance, because more than likely they bought a brand new GM block. Just from what it looks like, they bought a brand new GM block and then they just throw the rotating assembly in it and send it out the door. Maybe not, but that's sure what it looks like, because that makes it quick, fast, and easy. Because I think that's a standard bore piston. It don't even. No, it's 10 over. So it's a 10 over piston. So they honed it. So maybe it just ain't got enough clearance. And then we'll look at the head. So and these heads come here with all the intake valves bent off of that motor. And that was the first time that this thing was into. And so they had the wrong springs on it for the cam, and then this guy apparently was trying to shift it like $9,000 or something crazy. So it bent all the valves, and so I done a little checking, and the guides were a little bit tight, not crazy, but they were tighter than they should have been for this application. So we put like another 0.5 thousandths clearance in the guides. We honed them all, put all new valves in. The heads were sparkling clean, and we surfaced them, and the chambers look like that. Get in here and look at how much, I mean, you see how thick that carbon is? And I mean, literally that's just no runtime. I mean, it's got a few hours on this episode. So there is something going on, and you know, direct injection is problematic anyway with tuners and all of that. So, and then not to mention, this thing's like, you know, it's got a flat top piston with a 4-inch stroke. So it's like 12 or 13 to 1. I don't know, I ain't did the math, but it's I guarantee you it's 12 plus. And you know, they're gonna try to run that on pump gas, so we know that's not gonna work. But rod bearings, that was another thing about the fillet. With good rods, you see how the rod is offset and you got all this clearance here. So that goes back to that fillet in the corner, and I think, yeah, come over here where you can see it. You can see how big that radius is in the corner here on a performance crank versus, come over here and look at a stocker. And then this is a stock GM crank, and you can see it's actually undercut. That's what I was talking about, a roll forged. So that's actually undercut. So it doesn't matter on a factory crank, but on an aftermarket crank, you've got to have that clearance. So make sure when you're using, you know, if anybody's got, and it don't matter if it's LS, LT, small block Chevrolet, it don't make no difference. Just make sure that you're not trying to use a OEM gear without a chamfer, because you have got to have that chamfer, or you're gonna have a bad day with that kind of stuff there. So anyway, that's just a little update on this deal here, and just some FYI. And you know, be specific when you're buying this stuff offline. You know, you need to, I mean, I would think that you would be supplied with a parts list so you can compare. You know, if they're giving you $50 bearings and you think you're getting $125 bearings, that's a big deal. And if you're getting $400 pistons or $1,000 pistons, that's a big deal. And when you pay in, you know, $10,000 or $12,000 for a short block, you would expect premium stuff. I mean, this thing ought to have a $1,000 set of diamonds in it, and you know, $200 worth of King XP race bearings, but it don't. And so, you know, just be aware of that kind of stuff. And you know, I hope that helped. Thank you so much for watching.